The case of Marcus Eberhart and Howard Weems revolved around their involvement in an incident that escalated into fatal police brutality. The unfortunate series of events unfolded after a distressing 911 call originated from East Point, Georgia. Aisha Smith, the caller, reported her 24-year-old boyfriend, Gregory Towns, for domestic abuse. Officers Eberhart and Weems responded to the call, intending to restore order. However, instead of assuming their expected roles as heroes, they would eventually be regarded as the antagonists of this tragic tale. Upon arrival at the scene, Eberhart and Weems proceeded to handcuff Towns. However, when attempting to escort him to the patrol car, an alarming deviation from standard protocol occurred. The officers subjected Towns to repeated and excessive taser discharges, far exceeding what any person could reasonably withstand. This excessive use of force resulted in Towns tragically succumbing to electrocution. This shocking turn of events shattered the belief many had placed in law enforcement, the judicial system, and similar institutions. Aisha Smith, consumed by guilt, expressed remorse for making the call that day, never fathoming that the police would inflict such abhorrent horrors. She continues to bear this heavy burden to this day. The trials of Eberhart and Weems unfolded with intriguing disparities, leading to distinct sentencing outcomes for each individual. Weems received a 5-year prison sentence after being found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct, and violating his sworn duty as a police officer. Eberhart, in contrast, emerged as the orchestrator behind the decision to repeatedly tase Towns. Consequently, he faced a more severe judgment. Eberhart was convicted of felony murder and aggravated assault, resulting in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. A cop out of control needed a colleague to put him in his place. John Canfield, once regarded as one of the best detectives on the force, had become a menacing threat that required intervention from a fellow officer. Canfield's fatal flaw was his struggle with alcohol, which turned him into a different person. However, his drinking problems could never justify the horrifying incident that occurred in April 2017 in Poinciana, Mississippi. While intoxicated, Canfield ran into a group of school kids who had just disembarked from their bus, causing a devastating crash that unleashed true horror on the street. One of the children managed to call her father, Officer J.J. Quintana, who became the hero of this tragic story. Quintana pursued Canfield and ensured that he faced the consequences of his actions. As a parent, Quintana couldn't erase the memory of the unbearable scene he witnessed that day. Among the 5 kids that Canfield struck, 13-year-old Yaheem Robertson tragically lost his life at the hands of the person who was meant to protect him and others. The impact of this loss was immeasurable for Yaheem's family, as Canfield had taken away their child, their sibling. The other 4 children suffered injuries, and Canfield faced trial for his actions. Shockingly, he had the audacity to refuse a blood alcohol test, but he was eventually compelled to comply. The results revealed that his alcohol levels were double the legal limit. Instead of taking responsibility and admitting his fault, Canfield attempted to evade the charges like a criminal. He shamelessly claimed that his actions were the result of a medical issue, not alcohol consumption. However, the judge saw through his deceit and sentenced Canfield to 35 years in prison. Reflecting on the situation, it was evident that by the time Canfield would be released, his other 4 victims would have reached the age he was when he was incarcerated. The impact of his reckless actions would be a lifelong burden for those children and their families. Michael Dotro, a police officer, was someone who blurred the line between law enforcement and criminal activity. Similar to his daughter, he exemplified corruption within the police force. Dotro's criminal history dated back to 1998 in Edison, New Jersey, raising questions about how he was allowed to join the police force despite his prior offenses. It was evident that the system had room for improvement. Dotro's actions and transgressions from 1998 up until the present year depicted the worst traits one could expect from a member of society. Before becoming a police officer, he had already accumulated 18 convictions, and instead of reforming himself and adopting a lawful path, he exploited his position to escalate his criminal activities, increasing his convictions from 18 to 40. Among his crimes were conspiracies, clothing slashings, unauthorized system access, and witness intimidation. It seems as though he was intentionally undermining the integrity of the police force from within, but such conclusions were left to the discretion of others. The incident that finally exposed Doutro's true nature occurred in May 2013. He harbored a grudge against Captain Mark Andreyko, and instead of resolving their differences through dialogue like a reasonable person, Doutro chose to set fire to Andreyko's house, endangering Andreyko's wife, 2 children, and a 92-year-old mother. Fortunately, no one was harmed, but the situation presented a grim irony. Doutro had likely committed crimes that surpassed the severity of those perpetrated by many of the criminals he was supposed to apprehend. This was a sad reflection of the reality seen in countless news reports from various parts of the country. Undoubtedly, justice played no favorites, and Doutro faced trial like any other criminal. Throughout the proceedings, the judge's demeanor revealed a mixture of anger and disappointment. Eventually, Doutro was charged with multiple offenses and sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 17 years. Braulio Gonzalez, a man who personified what a true wolf in sheep's clothing looks like, was the subject of discussion. He was a former Miami-Dade officer who had been arrested in 2018 for heinous crimes he had committed as far back as 2011. However, instead of using his position to protect and serve, this individual unleashed his demons and criminal tendencies upon innocent minors. An anonymous victim bravely stepped forward and exposed Gonzalez for the sexual assault she had endured at his hands since he was 8 years old. Shockingly, he went to the extent of holding her at gunpoint and threatening her family, instilling fear into her very core. As a result, strict orders were given to keep the victim away from him and to cease any contact with her. The horror did not end there, as it was discovered that he had also subjected her sister to the same heinous acts. The gravity of the accusations initially seemed extreme, but once it became public knowledge that Gonzalez had physically abused some of his ex-girlfriends to the point of breaking their bones, any doubts regarding his accountability were eradicated. The case against Gonzalez was swift and decisive, leaving no room for argument or sympathy for a monster like him. Some individuals, including his wife, attempted to defend him, while the defense argued that he had saved lives during his career as a police officer. However, the judge remained unsympathetic towards a man who had committed such vile acts, emphasizing that certain deeds were so egregious that they overshadowed any past good deeds. While he may have saved lives in the line of duty, Gonzalez's daughters would forever bear the burden of his crimes. Throughout the entire trial, Gonzalez maintained his silence, refusing to make any comments, a testament to his guilt. Perhaps silence was a skill he needed to practice in prison, as he ultimately received a life sentence instead of the initial 48-year term. Daniel Holtzclaw was regarded as one of the most egregious offenders on the entire list. Once a police officer for Oklahoma City, he misused his authority, preying on the vulnerability of impoverished African Americans with warrants or criminal records. Rather than using his position to protect and serve the disadvantaged, Holtzclaw subjected them to his disturbing desires. In August 2014, his reprehensible actions finally caught up with him when he was apprehended for sexually assaulting a 57-year-old woman named Jamie Liggins. This initial victim's courage opened the floodgates, exposing a series of heinous acts committed by Holtzclaw, including sexual coercion and rape. His charges encompassed a total of 16 counts, with the number escalating to 36 as more survivors stepped forward. The survivors' testimonies painted a chilling picture of Holtzclaw's modus operandi. They revealed a pattern of assault wherein he would apprehend his victims, assault them at one location, transport them to another, and then abandon them. It was unfathomable that this so-called cop, entrusted with upholding the law, had likely committed offenses far more severe than those he had arrested others for. He deserved to share a prison cell with those he had wrongfully incarcerated for sexual assault. Since 2013, 13 women had come forward to testify against Holtzclaw. Despite his plea of not guilty, advancements in investigation techniques, such as DNA and GPS tracking, worked against him in court. The judge presiding over the case was visibly taken aback by the extent of Holtzclaw's depravity, choosing to dismiss any potential good he may have accomplished in his line of duty. The judge declared Holtzclaw guilty and charged of forcible oral sodomy, among others, and sentenced him to 20 years of imprisonment. Ultimately, the cumulative punishment for his offenses amount to a staggering 263 years behind bars.